pondering so much that's going on in the world, so much to cover, so much news is lost, and the many important stories that has us consumed around the world. But I must share this story with you in case you missed it. For the first time, a network of violent Antifa-linked suspects, that's right, Antifa-linked suspects, have been indicted on RICO charges, terrorism, money laundering, and arson. Stop Cop City suspects, many already charged with domestic terrorism, previously have been indicted by the same Fulton County, Georgia grand jury that gets indicted whom? Donald Trump and his associates. The suspects, get a load of this, allegedly were involved in a number of attacks across our country. Nonprofit Atlanta Solidarity Fund Network for Strong Communities allegedly was used to funnel cash around to militants right on American soil. Charles Faddis is back with us, the senior editor at A&D Magazine. Why is this story so significant, Charles, and why is it so underreported?
Well, it's significant because, if we roll the tape back a few years, right, we were all told Antifa doesn't really exist. It's all a fiction. Even as we see guys marching around with flags and attacking courthouses, we're just told nothing to see here, move on. So finally, we are seeing in the real world an indictment that tells us what every guy with any common sense knew all along, right? Which is we have a vast network of anarchists and Marxists in the country. Why don't they want to talk about it? Because the same news organizations that spent years telling you that Antifa doesn't exist are sure as heck not going to cover the evidence that it does.
But it's not the typical Antifa that we think of. Some of these are well-educated kids from high-income families, very wealthy, who infiltrates these protests and these marches across the country that we see, and their only agenda to destroy businesses, attack police, and create propaganda and chaos during these protests.
Yeah, well, look, the stereotypical Antifa guy in the real world is a white kid from an upper middle class family studying medieval art history somewhere. And look, as you well know, Armstrong, I've worked against Marxists and anarchists all over the world. That actually is the template for all such movements everywhere. I mean, who was Che Guevara? Che Guevara wasn't some poor kid from a slum clawing his way up. His dad was, I think, an Argentinian doctor, if I remember correctly. He was another spoiled rich kid. That, while they're out there expressing solidarity for Black people and brown people and all the underprivileged, in fact, all of these guys typically come out of our middle class. I mean, their parents put them through the best schools so they could learn to be revolutionaries.
And where are their parents?
Yeah, well, obviously not doing their jobs, right? Where is Dad? Dad somewhere along the way should have been grabbing Junior by the scruff of the neck and explaining the realities of the world. No, they're spoiled. They're out of touch, right? You think about it, it's true across the spectrum. This whole business about white privilege sources back to a lady who basically wrote about this invisible backpack of passports and privileges she carried around because she had suddenly tumbled to the fact that she was a rich white girl and she had all sorts of advantages other people didn't. What she failed to recognize, of course, is that there were a whole bunch of other people, regardless of skin color, who didn't have any of these privileges. So that didn't matter to her. Anyway, I mean, it doesn't surprise me where these people are coming from in Atlanta. This is actually, these are the folks that are leading this Marxist revolution across the country.
Wait a minute. No, Sam, across the world. What we're seeing in London, what we're seeing across Europe, the disruption, the shutting down of cities, they want to bring that same violence to America. It all ties together.
Yeah, you are 100% right. This is not just an American phenomenon. It is very much going on. If anything, it's further ahead in Europe And it is a real revolution. And of course, much of the media doesn't want to talk about it. But what is happening is, in fact, a revolution all across the world. And it's aimed at destroying the existing social, political, economic order. That's what its goal is.
You know, what we're trying to do today on this broadcast is talk about news that's under the radar that you should be aware of. Are you aware that the Chinese decided to experiment with a bunch of previously unknown viruses in laboratories? The Chinese that gave us COVID in the Wuhan lab, they are now again experimenting with unknown viruses. Sam, no one is talking about this.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. They recently announced in a journal article in one of their medical journals that they found, I believe the number is 8 previously unknown viruses, including, by the way, a form of coronavirus. And yeah, they're going to play with them now. The same guys that gave you COVID are going to mess with these guys. And not only are we not talking about it, but nobody's doing anything about it. Joe Biden recently announced that he remains committed to gain of function research. So all these years after playing with a coronavirus gave us COVID-19, because that's what happened, folks, whether it jumped the fence or they deliberately released it. What came out of that lab had been messed with and engineered. And now they are continuing to do it. And our formal policy from our president is that he supports this kind of research.
And Sam, we don't have to ask the question, what can go wrong? We've seen it firsthand with COVID-19.
Yeah, exactly. We don't. Here's the really sick part is that in the scheme of things, COVID-19 is a relatively mild disease. I have all the sympathy in the world for folks who suffered from it, who lost their lives to it. I'm not trying to minimize that. But in the scheme of things, that is nothing. Smallpox killed a third when it was rampaging around the world, killed 1 out of every 3 people it touched. The Black Death, the bubonic plague in Europe, basically depopulated entire cities. They had to bury people in the streets in mass graves, set entire countries back, by generations. That is what could happen to you with these guys. The next thing that the Chinese play with that jumps the lab fence or in one way or the other gets loose, you could be looking at something that really destroys humanity. It's insane. All these years after COVID-19, there should be a worldwide ban on gain of function research. Let's just start there.
America, I don't know why no one else gets this. Iran has declared war, Sam, and no one seems to have noticed.
Right. Iran has declared war on us. I mean, look, Hamas works for Tehran, right? When Hamas attacks Israel, that's Iran attacking Israel. Then you got all of these other Shia militias, these Hezbollah clones, Lebanon and all over Syria and all over Iraq. They all work for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards for Quds Force. They're trained by them, equipped by them, financed by them. They are attacking American forces. I think the last count I saw as of last night, when I lost track, was something like 13 separate drone and rocket attacks on U.S. installations. And to my knowledge, we haven't lost a serviceman yet, but we've had over 30 wounded. So we're getting rocketed and attacked every day by the Iranians, directly hitting American bases. And we're just pretending like it doesn't happen. We're just ignoring it.
I cannot emphasize Sam's earlier work as the head of the CIA's Weapon of Mass Destruction Terrorism Unit. Sam, the CIA no longer works, and no one seems to have the formula to fix it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a formula to fix it. It's just it comes down to political will. I mean, look, the formula to fix CIA is is twofold. First of all, obviously, CIA shouldn't be within 10 miles of American domestic politics. And anybody who comes anywhere near American domestic politics ought to be told that their services are no longer required. And then we can talk about prosecuting them. Then we get down to the brass tacks of actually doing the job. This is like walking into a military unit that's lost its edge. What's the answer? You go back to basics. You start laying down. This is our job, folks. CIA's job is to steal the crown jewels, to do what everybody else says is impossible. If you're not up for that, there's the door. We're not here to produce watered down assessments that say, with moderate confidence, we think North Korea remains to the north of South Korea. We're here to tell you the secret plan that Vladimir Putin has, that Xi Jinping has, that nobody else on the world knows, because we stole it yesterday. And that's the standard. And you go back to work, and you go back to work on behalf of the American people. What does that take? The key thing it takes is a president willing to provide the political support to do that. Right? You got to put somebody in there with a president behind them that says you got a blank check to do whatever you need to do and fire as many people as you need to fire. And we got to get back to work. Then you could make it happen.
You know, I want to go back because I want to tie this in before we go to break and then bring Dr. Ross Gunter into the conversation. I think what many people are missing in these days of rage with these protesters is what they actually want to do, Sam, is bring the war home to American territory, similar to what happened with the protests under President Nixon with the Vietnam War.
Yeah, well, that is their express agenda. And in fact, they say that, like with a lot of the stuff here, if you just listen to them, they tell you exactly what their plan is. And that is exactly the agenda now. In terms of the current situation with Hamas and Israel, for instance, the precise language being used by these people is bringing the intifada here. The intifada must be global. They use that phrase, global intifada, all the time. Intifada is not walking around with signs, guys. Intifada is murdering people and blowing things up, and they're saying it loud and clear.
Listen, it's time to take a break. Sam Faddis is our guest. When we come back, former Ambassador Jeffery Ross Gunter will join the conversation. I'm Armstrong Williams. Ambassador Jeffery Ross Gunter is joining us. He's the former U.S. ambassador from the United States to Iceland, and he's also a medical doctor, and he joins us by Zoom. You heard the unreported news in the conversation that we were just having with Sam, but let me add this also, because I don't know if many people saw this. And we verified this because both sides can put out propaganda. But the Israeli Air Force, doctor, published a very chilling handwritten note recently that was found on a Hamas fighter when they invaded their country on October 7th. And the words from the Hamas commanders was just actually chilling. It consisted of an order to kill Jews and encouraged to decapitate their victims and tear out their hearts and their livers. I mean, we're talking about human beings here, not animals. They went on to say, know that this enemy of yours is a disease that has no cure. Think about this, a disease that has no cure other than beheading and extracting the hearts and livers. Think about that. What does it say to you when you hear something like that and what we're up against?
It says that Hamas is like ISIS and ISIS is like Hamas. There's absolutely no difference between the two. In Syria and Iraq, ISIS had a caliphate to grow, to develop their terroristic behaviors, and to massacre people. The same thing today is going on in Gaza. Israel pulled out. They gave them autonomy in the region. It was taken over by the terrorist dogs, Hamas. And look what's grown there over the years. Israel was hoping to get a partner and what they have is they have ISIS living right next door to them. So the terror that we saw coming out of ISIS is probably even worse with Hamas. But I can assure you, when the Trump administration took over, I think at the time ISIS had something like 41% of the land of Iraq and Syria. When Donald Trump was done with them in a short time, they were 95% eliminated. Israel and America will wipe out these guys. That's the only cure for their ideology. It's the only way to free.
What is your what is the definition of wiping them out? What does that mean?
I would advocate for killing them. I think you have to find.
I understand that, but what does it mean when you say wipe them out? See, I don't even think that's possible.
Well, I think you have to disassemble their ideology, disassemble their infrastructure, and take those individuals who are threatening not only Israel, but threatening America, and eliminating them. It was very successfully done in Iraq and Syria to a degree of 95%. But remember, you also have to fight them here domestically. I believe to a degree, we've seen United States universities become basically forms of radical madrasas without the religious ideology. When you look at George Washington University and students calling Hamas terrorists martyrs and posting that on the walls of our universities, we have to stand strong against these guys. I know it's been talked about before. There is a crisis in our classroom, and it's not only going on in K through 12, it's going on at our major universities where this Marxist anti-American ideology is percolating through there. And we as Americans have to stand up, we have to be tough, and we have to dismantle the entire infrastructure. And that also includes eliminating all of those Hamas terrorists who not only killed Israelis, but they killed and tortured Americans, and who they also are holding hostage.
You know, you mentioned about education. Let me share this with you. The Oregon Board of Education extended a rule allowing students, get a load of this, to graduate without showing proficiency in reading, writing, or math, okay? Why? Somebody asked the question, why? Because apparently, gentlemen, these requirements disproportionately affects people of color. So dumbing down minorities is equity now? Is that what we're saying?
It's just god awful. The statistics are there. When you do not graduate high school, you make less money. You make less money, you have less opportunities in your life. So these guys are not really beholden to the students. They're not beholden to the parents. They're beholden to a Marxist ideology, which is being propagated by putting a government in place of parents. And this is a direct result of that. And it's a crime against those individuals that suffer the worst, which are the people of color, the people who have less advantages, and they owe them an apology, and they have to change their ways.
No, it's a soft bigotry of low expectations. That's what it is, Sam. But I want to come back.
Amen.
Go ahead, Sam. You wanted to say something, please.
No, you say exactly what you just said, which is I can't think of anything more racist, right? Because the implicit under what you're really saying is here you can't expect these folks to do any better.
No, to learn. No, they can't learn. So now, instead of having them rise to the standards, we're going to change the standards and lower the bar. And then when they graduate from high school, they face reality. They have no real skills. They have no real self-esteem. They find themselves in a life of crime, homicide, incarceration, sexual trafficking, and the kinds of things that we see that is totally destroying the American way of life today.
Yeah,
Simple.
Look, Armstrong, I have said many times, talking about Baltimore in particular, because my mom's family is all from Maryland, and I spent a lot of time in Baltimore. Look, if I was born as a kid in West Baltimore, growing up under the circumstances we're talking about, you know where I'm going to be when I'm 16? I'm going to be riding around in somebody's car with a gun in my waistband. Because what the heck else am I going to do? There are no jobs. There is no law and order. And by the way, now you're not even educating me, so I can't get a job anywhere. You have condemned me to that life. It is sick and it is twisted. And ultimately, in my view, it's incredibly racist. It's like, well, who cares?
And that is why they're so angry and have no conscience about what they do. I want to come back to something that Dr. Ross Gunter said about wiping them out. Israel started going into Gaza. But Sam, that's not going as well as they thought it would go, because that's a complicated matter. And realistically, Sam, what can they accomplish?
Well, I mean, let me preface it by saying this. In between what we've been doing and what we could be doing against these guys, there is, of course, a vast world of difference. We could start by not giving the Iranians $50 billion. We could dismantle Hezbollah, Hamas methodically over a period of time, cut off their money, etc. What's going to happen when the Israelis go into Gaza? It's going to be a mess, because you got a lot of bad guys, and then you just got a lot of people, like 2 million of them, stuck in the middle. So you're not going in and leveling blocks. You're going room by room by room. And as you do so, trying to figure out, is that guy there a combatant? Is she a combatant? Who's wearing a suicide vest? Is the whole room booby-trapped? We've done this overseas. It is brutal. And you're going to take massive casualties. And then when you're all done, you're going to be stuck with the question of, what do we do now? Because if we withdraw, it will just return to its previous conditions. So you not only have to clean it out, you then have to create a new reality. And I suspect that's part of the reason why the Israelis are taking their time about starting, because they know all of that.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Jim,
go ahead.
Good. Please go ahead.
Add to what Sam is. Personally, I visited every single Israeli military base almost in the entire country, having visited them and supported them in one way or the other. I think Israel and, quite honestly, America do not have an alternative there. I believe the plan that's really quite public out there on the open net of shifting much of the population to the south and then clearing out the north is something that there is no alternative to doing. And these attacks on Americans and these attacks on Israelis and these butchers, it has to be addressed. So I believe time is on the side of the Israelis, provided that they continue to get the support from America and from the international community, which obviously the Hamas terrorists are betting that those individuals outside of America and those individuals within America can start applying pressure and stopping the Israelis and somehow halting the support that America is getting. We've seen them make some inroads with that. But that aside, population needs to be shifted to the south. You need to eliminate these monsters. And you're absolutely right, Sam. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be tough. But the alternative is worse. And now is the only time to do it, not only for Israel's future, but they're not just chanting death to Israel. They're chanting death to America. And remember, we were choking off Iran quite well during President Trump's administration. We were choking off their money. We let them know that there was red lines to be crossed. When the Trump administration took out Soleimani, that put many of us as part of the Trump administration at risk. And it was worth it. It sent a message. And that type of toughness is what we have to show, not only in the Israel situation, but around the world. I think Ukraine is different. I think the whole situation with Putin in Ukraine cannot be mixed with what's going on in our fight against terror in Israel.
So let me go back to Sam as I say goodbye to you. You know, you've got members of Congress, like Congresswoman Tlaib. There are being rumors that she has strong ties to Hamas. As soon as Mike Johnson became the Speaker of the House and they passed the resolution overwhelmingly, you had 60 members of Congress that voted against the support to Israel. What about these members of Congress who are Hamas sympathizers, and we have no idea what their roots and where their loyalties are behind the scenes? Sam Faddis, how dangerous is that?
Yeah, it's incredibly dangerous. You see that with Hamas and with what I'll call the Iran lobby, you see on sort of the same thing we see with Chinese influence. I mean, we have people inside our government who are bought and paid for and ideologically aligned with our enemies. Hamas is 100% an enemy of the United States. They are a jihadist organization. This isn't a political party. This is a terrorist group, one of many funded and controlled by the Iranians, and part of an alliance that's now rocketing and attacking our bases. And you got guys and gals sitting up in Congress not formally saying they stand with these people who, again, as your other guest pointed out, are not just slaughtering Israelis on a horrific scale, but fully intend to do that if they get the chance here on our soil, and quite frankly could start tomorrow. We don't have a border, we don't have security, nobody's stopping anybody getting into the country, so this whole thing could blow up right here on our soil. And you got people seriously in Congress holding office saying formally in broad daylight, I stand with terrorism and mass murder.
Sam Faddis, so appreciate your voice. We ask people to subscribe to A&D Magazine. How can one subscribe?
Go to AND Magazine. We're on Substack, so andmagazine.substack.com. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll be back. You know, it's really a terrifying time and moment in our nation and the world. We're seeing the haunting echoes of Germany's ascent in the late 1930s, where an insidious and meticulously orchestrated campaign of dehumanization paved the way for the systemic extermination of the Jews. There, it wasn't just the genocide that was horrific, but the silent complicity, the tacit approval of the masses that let an entire ethnicity be methodically wiped off the face of the earth. Now, history threatens to repeat itself as we stare into this abyss once again, and that's what we're staring into. We're bearing witness to the deliberate conditioning and numbing of an entire society, and it's unfolding right before our own very eyes in real time. Young people, and I say it with emphasis, are being conditioned from a very young age to not only hate Israel, but to hate America, and to be silent when Jews are harmed. And what's even more alarming in America, this isn't in some far off corner of the world, but it's right at the heart of democracy. It's in the people's house, and you should be concerned. Neetu Arnold is a fellow at the National Association of Scholars, Young Voices. Neetu, your thoughts on how we're becoming so desensitized?
Right. I think a lot of the university's response to this was quite awful. They were very readily prepared to comment on the death of George Floyd or the Russia-Ukraine war. But when it came to Hamas's attacks in Israel, where many people on their own campuses could have directly been affected by this, losing their family members or friends, they were silent. So it's absolutely understandable why there's been a donor exodus on this issue, and it's something to pay attention to.
Did you see what happened with the New York Bar Association, Lawyers Association, where the president resigned after the press release that they put out condemning Israel, but yet praising Hamas? Well, I just don't understand. You know these young people. Who's influencing them? Where they're getting their information and how they're coming to these conclusions?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is really taught in the classes that students are exposed to. I mean, I don't know if you've seen George Washington University had, well, this wasn't by the university, but there were student groups which plastered these very pro-Palestinian, very sympathetic to Hamas's attacks right on the buildings. And the Middle East Studies Center over at George Washington University, which receives federal funds, is still going to host some events. One is going to be providing context on the whole issue in Gaza, which is really just a way to diminish and deflect from the attacks in Israel against Israelis, against Americans, against many other people that were unprovoked. And then there's going to be a second event in November that's going to characterize Israel as this authoritarian colonizer. So this is there's really a problem with the way universities teach these issues, where they're taking an oppressor versus oppressed lens to analyze world issues, and that's absolutely a problem.
You know, Neetu, and I know Dr. Ross Gunter is back with us. I'm going to tell you something that's very fascinating. I'm not even sure people are aware of it, because the extremists on the left are just up in arms about it. John Fetterman, as much as I criticize John Fetterman on our broadcast platforms, John Fetterman has been one of the biggest defenders of Israel. His condemnation of Hamas is unprecedented for a Democrat. There have been people on his staff, 12 of them, to sign a petition asking him to rethink his position and show sympathy for the Palestinians. His donors have said, you've been with us on every issue that matters. Why are you this way? Why are you so in support of Israel? And not only that, when you do your homework, when the NBCs and the CBS was trying to follow the logic, he has always been a defender of Israel. And he's also said that Hamas has to be eradicated, but his own staff, his own circle of influence, and even people in Pennsylvania want to condemn him, but yet they feel there's one of his. It just shows you how deep this is, that sometimes you don't know where people fall on this issue. But on this issue, John Fetterman finds himself on the right side of history, Doctor.
I'm a little tougher than you, Armstrong. I call balls and strikes. The reality is that Nike makes shoes. If you give money to Nike, you get really nice tennis shoes. McDonald's makes hamburgers. If you give McDonald's money, you get great food. Iran makes terror. If you give Iran $6 billion and $70 billion of petro money, guess what you get? You get terror and destruction around the world. They are in the business of terror. I deeply, deeply appreciate the support of the senator for Israel. But at the same time, let's just call balls and strikes here. It's like starting a fire and expecting to get credit for putting it out.
Well, you know, he didn't ask for credit. I'm just dealing with the facts. He's supporting the right side of this issue. But I want to go back. I want to go back to what Neetu said, which I think is critical. How these professors are indoctrinating these kids. I mean, if you look at what happened at Cornell University with the professor there, what he was saying is in support of Hamas, and when they were threatening to fire him, he backtracked. Not just George Washington University, Neetu, Georgetown University, right here in our backyard where we broadcast. Neetu?
Yes, and I think what's interesting about all of this is that everybody is now noticing, especially at Cornell University, Russell Rickford, the history professor, who said those vile remarks. When I was a student at Cornell University back in 2017, he was hosting a kneel-in and chanting Free Palestine, and yet there wasn't any outrage at that time. And so this is really a time for the public, for donors, to be paying attention to what's happening on campuses. Campus radicalization didn't just happen with this issue. It's been happening for years, and they really need to use the power of the purse to turn the tides, make sure that we can debate different ideas, that there is rigorous scholarship, and to ensure that when we're hiring professors, we're hiring them for their academic prowess and not for activism.
But the most important question now is, why do they feel this way?
I can address it. I think it's been a long-term plan of Marxist indoctrination and creeping into our countries. And as Marxists, they know if you get the kids when they're young, if you destroy the educational system, you destroy the nation, you destroy the values, you destroy the family structure. So this is all intentional. There's no coincidences here. And they've populated our universities with radical Marxist ideologies, and they've become somewhat of a secular madrasas like we saw during 9/11, where they are taking the hearts and minds of these students and almost brainwashing them into this absolute craziness.
Neetu, you're there, you see it every day, you've experienced it. Why?
I mean, I think some of this is historical ignorance, and they're not really being taught both sides of this issue, or actually fairly. And on top of that, I would say that they're really not exposed to different views. So this is, again, a reckoning on ensuring that we really bring back rigor to our campuses, allow debate, allow different viewpoints, and making sure that administrators have a spine, that they're enforcing rules, that they are ensuring that everybody has a chance to speak and make sure that views are heard.
You know, I think that Dr. Ross Gunter makes an interesting point when he points out McDonald's and these other conglomerates, but I just had this epiphany. You know, we often like to talk about how Israel and Jews support all these institutions around the world and also in the United States. But let me tell you something. Obviously, many of these institutions must be getting money from the Palestinians or for those that sympathize with it. Has anyone ever decided to trace the money to see the kind of support that places like George Washington and other places like Harvard that may get from people that are connected and strongly support Hamas and these organizations financially?
Actually,
go ahead, Neetu.
Sure. Actually, my organization, the National Association of Scholars, tracks foreign funding to universities, and I'm currently working on a database that really tracks this information. You know, the Department of Education does have this kind of information, but it's often spotty, it's not the most reliable, and so we're working on that right now. But there's a lot of money from places like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, so it is really important to first know exactly how much foreign funds are going to these universities, being able to trace who is actually funding these groups. And sometimes they're not even foreign groups. Sometimes these are from more liberal groups like Soros. So that was something that our report on the BDS movement.
Well, one thing we're going to do is once you get to the bottom of this, we're going to have you back, because we already know the Chinese have bought and paid for many of these professors and these institutions in this country. Neetu, thank you for what you do. Thank you for your voice. Dr. Ross Gunter, we wish you well. When we come back, we will be live on the ground from Israel. Don't go away.
Great.
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, live from Israel, we have Mr. G, who's with the Israeli Special Forces, joining us, and Fritz, who's a journalist and tech entrepreneur. I want to welcome you both on the broadcast. Let me start with you, Mr. G, because you've been on the ground, you're with the Special Forces. Help us understand the propaganda campaign that has resulted since what happened on October 7th, and how do we separate truth from fake news?
Well, there is so much evidence today as to what happened on October 7th and October 8th. You know, I live in New York in the last few years, and I got on the first plane Saturday afternoon from JFK to Tel Aviv. I got here Sunday morning, rented a car at the airport, drove to my unit roughly a mile from Gaza. So I still had a chance to see, you know, the mutilated bodies, the beheaded bodies, what they did to homes and to entire families, etc. I think the evidence is out there. There's obviously a numerical problem. For every kind of person standing with Israel, there are 100x more in the Muslim world that are essentially flooding social media and the internet with essentially fake news, right, as to what happened and what Hamas motives are. So really just having more people out there speak. I'm here with the troops roughly a mile from Gaza, and I can tell you that a lot of them, for them, it's not just about Israel or the Jewish people. It really feels like we're fighting for a broader fight for kind of Judeo-Christian values.
So Dr. G, you're inside, you and Fritz, and you're on the ground. Tell us what's not being reported.
So I think what's not really being reported.
Go ahead, Dr. G. Go ahead.
I think one thing that is underestimated by current kind of Western media is the fact that since the people in Gaza elected Hamas, by the way, the next day Hamas took all opposition leaders and either hanged them or threw them from roofs. That's well documented. So since then, we're talking 17 years. Essentially every nickel, every dime, every dollar that the world sent there was used to build a terrorist apparatus that is quite sophisticated, that is funded by countries outside of Gaza, outside of Palestinian Authority. And they essentially build, they always blame Israel that they build a jail. We didn't build a jail. They built a military apparatus, and we need to protect ourselves from it. So the amount of investment in infrastructure and technologies and rockets and ammunition that the Hamas people invested through funds from the kind of other countries around the world, I think it's still underestimated by Western media.
Fritz, help us understand the complication of the hostage situation. 31 Americans, scores of Israeli Jews, and from other countries. Talk about the dynamics and the movement by the Israelis into Gaza now.
So, as Mr. G mentioned, so I guess he's right by the Gaza border. It's been for the past few weeks since the outbreak of the war. The troops have been gearing up for an invasion. Something that as complicated that is, as you mentioned, the hostage situation. It's not a typical situation where, say, there's no hostages and we could just go right in and take care of war, whatever the war business may be. There are innocent lives there. 224 right now. 4 have been released, 2 American citizens, 2 elderly Australians, but there are 224 that are still remaining in there, and their lives are valuable. And I think that's something to point out and to really emphasize is the value that Israelis, the Jewish people, place on life, putting life first more than anything, that we're willing to put on hold what we could say is revenge or the rightful war that we have to take, the defense that we have against our land, because we're still so concerned about the lives of our people, and we're willing to put everything out and test all options before we really go out to war, because we want to make sure that our innocent civilians, they are able to come home to their families.
Mr. G, I find it fascinating. You got on an airplane and flew to your beloved Israel to fight. I've read so many other stories about young men like you that also went, and I'm reading about their deaths and the sacrifice that they made. Just how deadly is the situation there? I know Jerusalem is quite different because Jerusalem has 50% Arabs, and a lot of the sacred places for Muslims are right in Jerusalem. But the fact that 99% of Jews live in Tel Aviv, it is a target for Hamas because they believe in Hezbollah that if they do target Tel Aviv, they're going to end up killing Israelis and Jews.
Exactly. So I would say two things on that. One is that the feeling in Israel among the troops, but also the civilians, is that we're fighting for our existence. Not in the sense that Israel won't be around in a few years, it will, but we're fighting for our ability to live here for decades to come. so that our neighbors and the millions around us that want to see us get out of here and essentially annihilate us, right, understand that we're not going anywhere. So the genuine feeling from troops and people that got on planes from all over the world, and it's not just me, it's many people, and the heroes, the 19-year-old girls serving in the military, the elderly that are supporting the troops in different ways on the civilian front. The feeling is that we're fighting for our existence, that it will be a long war. And as I mentioned earlier, the second point, the feeling is that we're not just fighting for Israel or the Jewish people, that we're fighting for common values that the West, that liberal democracies globally are fighting for, and that we're just like another front line. There are other front lines, and the leaders that came from around the world in the last 2 weeks are actually also saying that we know you're also fighting for us.
Fritz, how important was it for our president to come to Israel and his Secretary of State, and how important is America's support of Netanyahu and his government as they fight for their existence?
So I think that support's always beneficial. I don't think in wartime we want enemies. We have enough enemies. I will tell you from the perspective that I've been hearing in the circles I am, is there actually is some level of animosity towards President Biden right now and Secretary of State Blinken. They came in and they said some really nice things. I think there's no doubt that the words were very strong. They were very powerful. They were very nice. But the action that Israelis have felt has been kind of to the counter of that. And you see it in what is being reported as what Biden, what John Kirby, the national security spokesperson, has said is it's more requests, but how Israelis have been taking is more pressure to limit combat operations, pressure to limit our operational capabilities and activity. And, it was actually very unprecedented that they say it was the first time ever that President Biden and Secretary Blinken, they both sat in on the war cabinet meeting with the Israeli government. And that's something that never happened before. And the question is, I guess, why did that happen? Was that the right thing to happen? But you're seeing it from across the board, experts, commentators from the right and from the left questioning, is the actions by the U.S. government, everyone's saying the words are nice, but are the actions, are they really benefiting Israel right now at the current state in the war?
Mr. G, do you think that our government wants there to be a ceasefire and they're trying to play both sides, appease the Palestinian constituency here in the United States as well as Israel? And how does that a non-win for anybody?
Yeah, I think a few things are true. I think one is that your government is over time, and I think it started in last week, and I think it will get worse, will bail in face of pressure from the Muslim world and adversarial countries. And I think even the troops here, even the common soldier will say, look, we have this window of legitimacy and support, because after that, the world will turn on us. That will be a lose-lose, right? Because once you show Hamas, and by proxy, Iran and Hezbollah, and Iran, as we know, is like the head of the octopus, right? They're supporting essentially all terror groups in the Middle East that are actively massacring civilians in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in the West Bank, in parts of North Africa, etc. If we show them that even after something like this, we as Israel, we as the Jewish people, we as democracies, we as the Western world are not willing to go in and do the job, I think it will have long-term effects on the ability of our democracies, our free societies to face this danger.
It is obvious in the 45 seconds that we have left, Mr. G, that you've made a decision. This is something that you're willing to die for.
Yeah. And my family knows it, my friends know it. And it is important to say that currently there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis that have normal lives. They have tech businesses, they write in newspapers, they own a coffee shop. And on the day it happened, they all showed up. So attendance to reserve duty in Israel, it's over 150%, right? So people that didn't do reserve duty for a while, that are not supposed to do it legally, are just showing up.
Well, listen, man,
asking for a weapon
you
and
showed
wanting to
up, you
participate.
there. I cannot thank you and Troy and Sam Faddis and all our other guests for joining us today. We'll keep you in our prayers and remain safe. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you for joining us for today's broadcast.